All right, so today's topic, we're talking about, what is a QMS? When I say QMS, what I'm referring to is a quality management system. The key words in that really, obviously quality is very important, but we're really focused on the management system portion of it, right? A good QMS is it's a customer focused system of managing your processes. So probably definitely the most prevalently incorporated quality management system globally is the ISO 9001 standard. More companies are certified as 9001 certified companies than any other certification. And for the most part, that kind of sets the foundation for a lot of other quality management systems to be built off of. So we'll reference that one a lot throughout, but we'll talk about some other QMSs for specific industries as well. QMS, again, it's that system of management of your processes. At its core, it's going to start with helping you determine the context of your organization. Who are you and what do you do? Who you serve? Why is it's going to set some framework for establishing what is it that you add, what value do you add to your interested parties, and what are their requirements of you. Once that part's established, then you can start talking about, what is the responsibility of the management team? Like, who is top management? How are you going to make this quality management system effective if you don't have a management team to drive it, support it? The most effective quality management systems are driven by top leadership, right? It becomes a company initiative to implement these things. Once you've got that commitment from your management team, and you've got your vision and you know what you're going to do, then you got to figure out how to do it, right? So most QMSs will have a section on planning, where you're gonna plan the implementation, the development. How are you going to roll this system out in an organized, structured manner? And the standards associated with these QMSs have the guidelines based on the specific industry you're working in. So again, we kind of talked that ISO 9001 is the most widely used standard, but if you're working in aerospace, for instance, you're probably going to be using the AS 9100 standard, which is it's got all the requirements from ISO 9001 in it, but it's got the nuance and flavor that is specific to the aerospace environment. Medical would be the ISO 13485 standard, which again would have all the standard requirements of 9001 plus whatever is specific for medical. There's different standards for different industries, so knowing the one that's the right fit for you might take a little bit of a research or investigation based on what you do and who you serve. But once you have the planning in place, then most of these standards will have some provisions about identifying your resources. How are you going to make these processes effective? Who's going to do it? What facilities are going to be used? What are the training requirements? What are the knowledge requirements? And it gives you guidance on, how to structure putting those pieces together so that you can be successful. Once you have that, you've got your plan, you've got your resources, you're committed, who you serve, then the quality management system is going to move into the operations, right? How are you going to do the things that you've planned now to do? And it's going to set some framework around that. So it's also going to extend to your supply chain and your external providers of product or service. And it's going to give you some guidelines on how to communicate those requirements through your supply chain, how to interpret requirements from your customers, how to take the information that you have and convert it into knowledge and instructions through your shop floor. Then you'll move into evaluation, right? Once you've done some of these things that you plan to do, you want to measure and say, hey, did we did we do them as well as we planned? Did we do them better than we planned? Are there things that we should, that we did by accident that we should keep? Are there things that, that we didn't think about up front that maybe caused some pain that we should try and eliminate? And ultimately, I mean, that should create a cycle to where you're continually improving, right? And that's that kind of last part of most standards is the improvement part. And you take that knowledge and you bring it back up to the beginning stages of that process and you adjust your plan. So if that's being done, as designed or as the standard intends, then you create what's known as the Pdca cycle. It's a plan, do, check, act cycle. And because it's cyclical, because it is a cycle, you will find through iteration that your QMS will become stronger and stronger. Now, things that aren't necessarily directly within your QMS, but certainly could, be adopted in some ways or structured, or things like, your QMS isn't going to tell you how to set your prices for your customer. It's not going to go into great detail on, the safety factors related to your work environments, things like that. It'll touch on some of that when you're dealing with your resources, but it's not one of those things that commonly get misinterpreted to where you have to document absolutely everything you do, right? That's probably the biggest feedback I get from people who aren't real familiar with QMSs. They say, oh, if I go ISO or if I go AS, then I have to document everything I do. It's not really the intent, right? The intention is that you document enough of what you do in an organized way to where it can be done repeatably and reliably, and that you can continually improve those processes. So, the things that a QMS isn't is those business structure things, pricing. It doesn't tell you what your lead time should be. It doesn't tell you, how many people you should have, or things like that. It sets the framework for your processes. Once you have those things in place, how are you going to perform them, and how are you going to make sure they're consistent? So a lot of people have different motivations for implementing a QMS. A very common motivation is that you've been doing business for a little while, and you're starting to get some customers, and all of a sudden you have a customer who says, hey, you know what, we only want to do business with people who are ISO certified, effective immediately. So that's, that prompts a mad scramble sometimes to figure out what is ISO, how do we get certified, so on and so forth. And people are very, people have varying success with, implementing their processes based on their motivation. But typically what I see as the most successful reason for implementation or motivation is that, you want to strengthen your processes so that you can enhance your customer focus, right? When that's your motivation, then, rather than just a mandate, it tends to be more, a little bit easier of a pill to swallow. Ultimately, if you implement a QMS with that mindset, you're gonna want to do things like incorporating your bigger team, right? Make sure it's an effort that everyone is on board with as much as you possibly can, so that it's effective when you implement. Things that common concerns, I guess, when you implement a quality management system, is how much work is it going to take? How many people am I going to need to do this? Fact is, there's companies out there that are one-person operations who are compliant and even certified to standards like ISO 9001, AS 9100. So it doesn't have to be a huge undertaking to develop that. Now, as your company grows, as you get more employees, as you get conflicting or multiple demands from requirements from various customers, you might, hopefully that quality management system will grow and evolve, and it will become, a bigger thing, because you want your company to grow. So naturally, the components of it are going to have to grow and become more complex. But that initial implementation doesn't have to be very strenuous. There's a lot of services out there that have implementation packages that are generally speaking, they're a pretty good starting point, but they're not going to be tailored to your specific day-to-day operations. So what they'll deliver is they'll deliver a document packet that has every document you might run into or might want to use, and then you'll have to comb through and say, okay, this applies to my business and this doesn't, so this is what I'm going to use, what I'm not. And really tailor it to fit your organization. When it's that tailored quality management system that fits what you do, they typically have a lot more success. Another reason why you might want to implement a quality management system is it's not a bad marketing tool, right? I mean, if you if you're presented to a purchasing team for a product that you develop right next to another team or organization that does a very similar thing to you, and you have an ISO badge on your website and they don't, that might be the point that tips you over the scales to say, hey, you know what, their prices are about the same, their lead times are competitive. Let's go with the ISO guys, because we know that they're getting audited and verified that they do what they say they're going to do. Now the process for implementation, and I'll clarify, there is a difference between implementation and certification. You can implement a quality management system and never get certified, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of the people who are motivated by simply enhancing their customer experience, they might choose that route to be compliant and fully implemented, but not go with certification. If you don't have a demand for it, and there's no customer saying you must, well, then that's a decision you have to make as an organization, right? Maybe there's not an ROI in certification, but you still see the benefit from it, right? And your customers see the benefit from it. So implementation really comes to making that decision, making getting your management committed, engaging your team, taking the standard one piece at a time, right? ISO, for instance, it's got 36 pages of requirements. AS has a couple pages more. 13485 has even more than that, and it can be a big pill to swallow. So the best bet is to break it up, small digestible sections. Take it one section at a time. Make sure that all your interested parties, internal and external, are on board with it and understand what you're doing, and are being trained as you go, right? Because it's very difficult to build this stuff in a silo and then dump it into a team's lap and say, this is what we're doing now. Measure yourselves often too, right? As things progress, if you're taking one step at a time, implement it, test it, see, measure it, see how it's working out. If it needs to be adjusted, adjust it early rather than, after you've got this big rollout, this big project, trying to fix a bunch of stuff at the end. If you do decide to go from implementation to certification, you're going to want to pick a registrar. A registrar is going to be an organization that they're going to be the ones who issue you the certification. The certification is a document that you can share with clientele. They'll give you the rights to use their logo on your website, things like that. So that's how you get that advertising piece. It's also how you depending on your industry, will land in a registry of certified companies. So for instance, aerospace uses a registry through OASIS, which is it's just basically a place where if I want to do business with you and you're an aerospace company, I can go look your company up and see the status of your certification. I can also see if you had any non-conformities in your audits and what they were and how you handled the corrective actions and things like that. So it's a way, those registries are a way to provide transparency to your customer. Once you've got your registrar picked, make sure that they are accredited. There are some registrars out there that are operating in an unaccredited status. And, really what that means is that there's no reliability on whether or not the certification you get from them is I mean, it's not going to really be worth much. Basically, they might give you the exact same or even better service than a ANAB accredited or an otherwise accredited registrar. But how do you convince that to a company or a client of yours that's said, hey, I need you to get certified if they're not, if they don't have that accreditation. Once you have your registrar picked out, you know that they're accredited and they're the ones you're going to go with. Schedule your stage one, right? At this point, you should have already built up some of your processes. You should have your documentation in place. You should have, digested the steps of your standard and integrated them into your systems enough to where it's safe to have somebody come and take a first pass at it. That's what that stage one is, right? It's really just an evaluation of readiness. Your registrar will assign an auditor. A lot of these audits are remote these days, so you don't even necessarily have to have somebody come in, but you'll share records, you'll share procedures, they'll ask questions, they'll meet with your management team, and they'll just kind of get a feel of whether or not you have a quality management system in place that would stand up to a more thorough audit. They might give you some advice, some feedback, and say, hey, you're missing this, or maybe you should strengthen this up before we move into stage two. And you'll take their advice and make those changes, right? Implement into your process whatever is appropriate to strengthen it up so that you're ready for stage two. Once you get ready for stage two, that's a more thorough audit. They're going to go through the standard. They're going to go through all of your processes. The duration of that audit will be based on the size of your team, and different standards have different durations. So it'd be important to ask, how much resource does your registrar need from your organization? How long is it going to take? And usually they're pretty upfront with most of that stuff. They'll actually, in most cases, give you a pretty well detailed agenda. And whether or not they follow it to the letter or not, that's kind of between you and your registrar on how strict you want to follow the agenda, but you will cover all the same topics. So making sure what they're going to ask will enable you to have the resources available to answer those in the best way possible. During your audit, the audit is really intended to strengthen your quality management system. So there's not a lot of benefit in trying to stage the stuff that you present to your auditor, or don't try to guess or tailor an answer based on what you think they want to hear. It's really best just to give them the answer that is the most accurate reflection of what you do day to day, so that if they do write it up as a non-conformity, it's something that you can then use to strengthen that quality management system. Having a non-conformity in an audit does not mean that you're going to not get certified. If the auditor did a decent job at stage one, and you did a decent job as an organization of implementing a quality management system, there's really not a lot of reason why you shouldn't pass your audit at stage two. If you do have some gaps or some shortcomings, they'll write it up in a form that is called a non-conformity report. It'll document what the problem statement was, and then it's going to be kind of on your plate as an organization to determine what was the root cause of that, fix the root cause, and then present those findings back to your auditor. Now, there's two types of findings. Typically, there's going to be a major and a minor. So a major is on your initial certification. A major is a complete breakdown of a process, so that or the absence of a process that is required of the standard. So, for instance, if you didn't have any way to handle non-conforming product, for instance, yet the auditor came in and they saw that you had making product, you've got scrap product laying around the shop, but you have no process on what to do with it or how to handle it, well, they might write that up as a major. On the same topic with non-conformities, if they find that you've got a process in place and you've got a place to segregate non-conforming product, but through the audit, the auditor finds a piece of non-conforming material that's not tagged appropriately. Well, that might be a minor, right? Now, a major is going to require more aggressive action, right? You're going to have to get on that root cause faster, because there's a potential that those majors could find their way to your customer much more likely than a minor, right? A minor says, hey, you know what, we catch most of this stuff, but something might have slipped through. A major says, hey, we don't even catch this stuff, so something probably slipped through. And depending on the standard you're being audited to, that might mean the difference between a 10-day corrective action and a 30-day corrective action. But in either case, when you get your corrective actions taken care of, you've done your root cause, you submit, then it's going to be in the hands of the registrar and the registrar's review team. So typically that, they're going to, it's not just the auditor making the decision, right? He's going to present the packet with all the closed NCRs, non-conformity reports, to a review team. And, it might take, depending on the standard, it might take a couple of weeks up to, 5 or 6 weeks. But they'll make a decision. And if the decision is favorable, and at this point it should be, right? You've done all the work and you've corrected the gaps, then they'll issue you a certification. And with that certification, you'll have access to the logo like we talked about to put on your website. You'll have a piece of paper that you can share that proves that you've been rigorously evaluated and that you meet some minimum requirements that are relative to the work that you do and the industry that you serve. So, in a nutshell, that's QMS. At this point, I'll stop the recording. We can open it up for any questions.